Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I have to say we've been Zooming all the time, but if I'm just being honest, it's a little different knowing that there are 66 people logged into this and I cannot see any of you. So that's a little bit of a different experience for us. So I wanted to just introduce everybody because we do have 45 minutes. You should see there are four of us that are on this screen right now. For those who don't know me, my name is Eric Larson. I'm the principal. Kelly Vignoki is, well, she's on my right. I don't know where she is on your screen, but she is the assistant principal. We have Sarah Klansnick. She is our nurse. And then Adam Harris is the head of communications and storytelling for the district. Between I'm Eric. Between myself, Kelly, and Sarah, we will be answering as many questions as we possibly can. Adam's role in this is he is your voice. You have the ability to enter questions into the chat, and Adam's going to be kind of filtering through those and, kind of grouping them together to give questions that can then be turned over to Kelly, Sarah, and myself. On one hand, 45 minutes feels like a long time, but I have a funny feeling 45 minutes is going to fly by. We're going to do our best to be concise, and we're going to ask for forgiveness on the front end for two things. One, we may not know the answer to every question. We are certainly going to do our best, but if we don't know, we're going to shoot straight and say, we're not sure, and we'll get back to you on that. The other thing is, because we anticipate there will be a good number of questions, it's quite possible that we won't get to all of them. And if that's the case, Adam will have all of the questions that were posed that we didn't get to, and we'll create a document that we can share with everybody to get those questions answered. So if we didn't answer your question, please don't take it personal. You can blame Adam. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so Adam, could you throw Adam created a nice little agenda for us. So Adam, if you could just throw that up on the screen. We want to break tonight into really three categories. We've identified in this building, we talk about this with staff, we have three main priorities here, and we really do have them listed in their actual rank order. So health, safety, and building procedures, that is paramount for us. In order for everything else to happen, we need to have those things in place. The second thing is social emotional well-being, particularly for your children, and then curriculum instruction, and then all other questions. So Adam, you can take that down. Thank you. So what I'm going to do, because we asked families to submit questions to us in advance. And if you did that, we are so appreciative of that, because we want to give thoughtful and concise responses to you. So we're going to kind of bounce around between all of the panelists on a couple different topics, but we're going to just kind of we're going to start with the questions that came in online, and then we'll go from there. So one of the questions that came up was specific to how many students have chosen remote or in-person learning. And so I'm happy to report, I think this is an exciting number, 85% of the people chose in-person, and 15% chose to be remote. And so that's really important. And those numbers actually allow us to do some things that are a little bit unique to Patton that we can talk about a little bit later on. Because I've been talking a lot, I'm actually going to turn it over to Sarah. And Sarah's going to talk a little bit about the self-certification process, because that was a question that had come up as well, and then about kids who have symptoms. So Sarah, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. When it comes to self-certification, there is a checklist of symptoms. It is on the district website. It's also in the stage 3 hybrid reopening plan. Mr. Larson also put it in the Patton hybrid plan document. So it's a list of questions of symptoms, and every day before your kid goes to school, you're going to answer the questions for me, please email me. I'm happy to work through it with you. Some of the guidelines are changing all the time, so we're working through that. And I may not have the answer for you right away, but I'm sure to find that out for you. I know some of the questions are about potentially if your child is sick or they wake up with a headache or a sore throat or runny nose. If any of those questions in that self screener are a yes, then you're going to keep them home. And then we'll talk about it at that point. You can call me, report your child absent, and we'll go from there. And also that self-screener, you do not need to prove or send anything into school. There's no actual checklist that you're going to fill out. You're just going to go through that in your mind at home and kind of do that. But it does need to be done every day for every student. So that is an important thing as well. And by saying that they do not have any of those things, you're saying they are healthy to come to school. So we'll go with that. And then if anyone's sick or has any problems, any issues, please call. And I'm happy to talk with you about anything.
Thanks, Sarah. The next layer of questions that kind of came into us was really related to some of the logistics related to procedures. How do kids come in and out of the building? Classroom spaces being clean. So I will try really hard to be concise because I have a tendency to just, really go into the details. But for those of you who are returning families, you know that on typical school years, we line up all our students on the blacktop. And we're still going to be doing that, but they will be spaced out more than what you're used to. If you happen to have been to the playground or just on the property, you'll notice, I'll be honest, there are a lot of lines now that are painted on our blacktop. It's a little visually overwhelming, just to be honest, but we have boxes. We have 5 boxes going all the way across, 6 in fact, but we're only going to be using 5 right now. And each box will have orange dots. They already have the orange dots that are painted on there, and all those dots are socially distanced. They're all appropriately spaced out so kids are apart from one another, and we will be expecting kids to wear their masks when they're lining up outside. We'll talk about masks in recess a little bit later, right? We're also going to be having teachers come out. They're going to come out, they're going to meet their class. They are going to walk their class in. And we have a very intentional and thoughtful and really methodical approach to who goes in when, who goes in first, second, third, because the goal is to prevent bottlenecking and as much crossing over of kids as possible. So we think we've devised a system that will prevent all of that and allow for a smooth transition in the building. When it comes to the end of the day with kids leaving, inside, and I just want to reference to some of what we're talking about. Some things might be able to be answered in that hybrid procedures document that we sent out from Patton. So if you haven't taken a look at that, I really would encourage you to go through that. But for exiting the building, what we're going to have students do is we are going to release the walkers first. We're going to release them at about 3:30, and we really want walkers to leave the property. And a walker is defined, in my mind, in 2 ways. One, if you're literally going from the school to your home, you're a walker. But we also know that some families choose to park down the road and have their kids walk to the car, as opposed to being picked up in the drive-through lane. So if you park way off site, you're considered a walker in this scenario. So we're going to release the walkers at 3:30 so that you can get off the property. And then at 3:35, then we're going to release the students who are being picked up by, a parent, a guardian, a family member, grandparent, whomever, in our normal drive-through pass. Now, if you're a family who's traditionally done CAP, and you're like, man, I never have to do that, we'll send more detailed information out just so that you don't feel like you don't know what's going on when it's time to pick up your kid, because that's a process that you've never done. But basically, if you imagine where that black fence is where the blacktop and the sidewalk come together, we have those. I'm going to go back to referencing those orange dots. Those dots serve so many purposes. The kids will then use those dots to stand on as they're waiting for their ride to come. Once they identify that their vehicle to be picked up in, then they can leave their spot and go get in their car. It's going to take an element of training with the kids. We will have a lot of staff outside to help support this effort. Okay. Adam, I'm not following the chat, but I also don't want, we want to make sure that this is as much of an interactive experience for everybody as well. So my original intention was to kind of pause as we got through some of those questions, but Adam, are you seeing any questions that maybe people want answers to on what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, so, Okay, so what if you don't know if you'll be driving or walking for pickup or plan to walk, but then the weather is bad, so you drive. So what about planning like impromptu for weather on coming?
Sure, that's a really good question. So I think it would be good, like for typical days, that your children know the plan. But if at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all of a sudden you're like, "Ooh, the plan's changed," you just need to call the office. You can call the office. You can talk to Mrs. Hamilton, Mrs. Schmidt, and they can get in contact with the classroom teacher to inform the student that they're either being picked up or walked. So we can shift around that way. No problem at all.
You know, another one, I'm not totally understanding it, but I'll just ask it as it is. What if a child is given fever-reducing medicine to mask a fever, but then it wears off? What will be the protocol then? All right, now that I read it, I get it. So, yeah.
Sure, I can answer that. That actually would be the same protocol that we've always had, which if we determined a student to have a fever, they would be going home. And I would be contacting the parents, and we would just discuss it at that time and kind of work through what's happening. With COVID, fever being a symptom, there are guidelines for that. Like I said, I think before, the guidelines are always changing. So we'll work through that and determine the next step from there.
And then children with allergies is another question. Child has allergies, nurse has a note. Can we send them to school, I guess?
So the answer to that is yes, if their symptoms are due to allergies. I know some of the symptoms for COVID and some allergy symptoms are exactly the same. They do cross over. So we're going to do our best to determine, are they healthy? So going through that checklist, if they have a runny nose and itchy eyes, for instance, and you know that's due to their allergies in the fall, that's fine. I would just like it if you maybe sent me an email or gave me a call and said, this morning, these are the symptoms they're having. If they're fever free and everything else on the checklist is no, then yes, they may come if I have a doctor's note stating that they have allergies. It has to be documented that I have that. So yes, the answer would be yes in that case.
So the other questions are concerning instruction, which we can handle later on. Yeah, and we're about 13, 14 minutes in, Eric.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And you know what? I just happened to catch my eye on the chat to the one question about like having multiple children who are walkers, like siblings. Can they find each other? Of course, they could find each other. That would be appropriate. All right, so as we're kind of waiting for some additional questions to come in, the other questions that we were related to was really connected to like student spaces, you know, desks, tables, shared supplies. Will there be shared supplies? Will there not be shared supplies? So across the entire building, there are desks in every classroom space. So there might have been a concern where, like, you know, if you've been in a classroom, some of our classrooms historically have had like those trapezoid tables. And so if you're thinking, my goodness, those trapezoid tables are not long enough, it's okay, because we're not using the trapezoid tables. The desks inside the classroom are distanced apart. Now, in terms of like the cleaning of the desks, typically in like a kindergarten class, first, second, third grade, for the most part, like kids, all of their instruction happens inside the context of that classroom. But when you start to get into like fourth and fifth grade and we start thinking about advanced math, kids do have to leave, right? Like if I have to get, like if my homeroom teacher is the advanced math teacher, but I'm not in advanced math, I would get my math instruction in a different classroom. So I would maybe be sitting in Kelly's seat when I go to math, and she might be sitting in my seat. So anytime there's a transition, you know, where kids are leaving, that desktop is cleaned and sanitized. And if you have middle school kids, you know that like their desks are being cleaned, in between all the classes, and essentially the same protocol is occurring here. So this applies to things like, advanced math is, an easy option or an easy example to share, but like if kids are going into intervention rooms, if they receive, support services or whatever, anytime somebody basically leaves a seat and we know somebody new is going to be in there, that gets cleaned. And it's a shared responsibility from the cleaning perspective between the student and the teacher. And when I say shared responsibility, I mean that the teacher really does participate in the process of the cleaning. It's not, the student's not going to be left up to their own devices to make sure that they cleaned it. The teacher's really going to ensure that all of those things have occurred. And I think one of the things that we are learning as we go through the planning is, especially in these early stages, as we're building, like the kids, the right word I'm looking for, like as we're building them up toward some independence with these procedures, it's going to take some time. Like time is a factor that we really need to invest into training so that they do a good job. So in terms of shared supplies inside the homeroom class, it's unlikely that there would be shared supplies. I mean, I don't want to give an absolute and say it's impossible, but it's unlikely. But if there were a supply that needed to be shared, that supply would be cleaned and disinfected. So, just as a simple example, if I needed to give this remote control to Sarah, this would have to be cleaned before it got placed in her hands. And that's important information for you to be aware of when we think about specials. Because if you are in Mr. Whitaker's class and, if they're playing an instrument and they have to use like mallets to play something, those mallets will be cleaned in between music classes, so that everybody's always touching something that's clean. The same is true for art. The same is true for PE. We will always be cleaning those things. And then the same is also true during the lunch hour. And Adam, again, I know I've been talking for a bit. Do you think I should stop, or would you like me to go on with the lunch?
I have a couple questions that we could do quick hits, I think.
Sure.
So, if my student stays home due to like a runny nose or symptoms, can they still participate via e-learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, yeah. If they are unable to attend, they are still able to participate remotely. We would want to be notified in the office of that. So as a parent, like a good practice would be that if your child has to stay home for, I think you used the example of a runny nose, that the parent just send an email to like 3 people. If I could have my dream, it'd be 3 people. It would be the teacher, it'd be Mrs. Klansnick, and it would be Mrs. Hamilton. Because all 3 of those people need to know that information because it needs to be documented. But at a minimum, if the only thing you can remember is I have to tell the teacher, we'll still be able to work it out. So.
What about quarantining for travel? If some students are in travel sports or travel arts or whatever, what's the situation for coming back and quarantining or not quarantining?
Yeah, so we are following the guideline, like the Cook County Public Health Guidelines. And in those guidelines, it recommends that people quarantine at home when they travel to those high-risk states or locations.
And yeah, the follow-up is, how is that being enforced by us? It's not something that I think that we're necessarily enforcing. It's just a recommendation that we are adhering to by the Cook County Department of Public Health.
Yeah, the truth is that's the greatest challenge. We are counting, again, if I go back to like our number one priority is health and safety, we would, of course, we would encourage and we would ask families to follow those recommendations. But to your point, Adam, you're correct. Like this isn't something that like we can't be the travel police. So we would really ask families to, be thoughtful about, everybody's health and wellness when they make decisions related to travel and quarantine.
So yeah, I think maybe we could probably move on to the second subject.
Cool.
Unless you feel like we haven't tackled some stuff.
No, I think we can move on. All right, so the next section is really related to social and emotional well-being. We didn't have a ton of questions in this category, but we wanted to make sure that parents knew that this really was a priority to us. And to kind of go back to something that I had stated earlier about like things are just going to take longer. And so one of the things that we really want teachers to like have the permission, like they have permission to do this, and we want parents to understand and realize that this is the direction that we're asking teachers to go. Is in, in this first week, possibly in these first 2 weeks, we really want to focus on like building a strong classroom community between not just the kids who are in person, but the kids who are remote. We don't, no teacher wants to penalize, any kid because they chose remote. They really want to try to come up with ways to incorporate them into the classroom as much as possible. I say this, probably not really jokingly, but like, a lot of times we look backwards into history to figure out like what's the best way to do something. But the reality is there isn't anything like close enough historically that really gives us some guidance. So we're really going to focus on that social emotional connection between the in-person kids with the teacher, the in-person kids with the remote kids, and then the class as a whole. There's kind of like 3 things happening at one time. And one of the questions that came up that kind of fit into our social emotional category was, is my child going to have the same teacher that they currently have? And the answer to that question is yes. Speaking, I'm only speaking for Patton because I only know Patton. The answer for Patton is yes. Who your child's teacher is today is who your child's teacher is, when we hit hybrid. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. So like the consistency component is really important. And then I don't recall who asked this question, and I wouldn't call you out, anyway, but it's a great question. And it might be one of my favorite questions that was asked. And the question was like, how can parents best support their children's teacher during this time? I just love the spirit that question comes with, because it really comes from a care and concern, for the teachers. And one of the things that I've noticed, from the beginning of this school year till now, that's different from any other school year that I've ever been a part of, at least as a principal, is the amount of positive feedback that teachers are getting. This recognition that like what they're doing is like, it matters. It's having a positive impact on their kid. They feel like their child is making connections. And I would say that the first thing I would, say is if you notice something that's going well, whether your child is in hybrid, whether your child's in remote, I think it's great to express that and to share that, because it doesn't take much. Like a 2-sentence, like, thanks for what you're doing, it meant a lot when you did this for my kid. That can literally propel a teacher, through the weekend, for a couple of days. So those little acts of kindness of just saying something like that makes a big difference. And then the second thing that I think that you could do for teachers is just to offer grace. Because again, since we haven't done this before, and since they are, I'm not just saying this because I like them and I'm their principal. I'm saying this because it's true. They are working their tails off in a way that I don't think any of them have ever worked their tail off before. It is the amount of time and intensity and work that they're putting into this to make this a great experience for your kids is, it's unbelievable. But as we transition now, we've gone from, what we used to know school to be, to what the spring was, to what the fall is, to now something else new. There's a learning curve involved in that. And so just recognizing that there is a learning curve, things might look a little different. It's possible it could get rocky in the beginning, might get a little rough before it gets smooth. And that's not because people don't care. That's just because we're trying really hard to work out the kinks so that it looks good. I would never say, let's be honest, teachers also wouldn't turn away a Starbucks, gift card, because they're probably living on coffee right now. So, it's being recorded, nuts. So yeah. And then maybe a little bit about like well-being and whatnot. Kelly, do you want to just talk a little bit about like breaks and stuff in the classroom?
Absolutely. But I'm wondering if we want to jump back up to health and safety and procedures for just a moment and talk a little bit about lunch and recess and snacks, because that will naturally lead into the breaks. And I think there were a lot of questions that initially came in related to those areas.
Yeah, so we can, let's bounce back to that. Thank you, Kelly, for catching that, because one of the procedural pieces that we didn't talk about but was asked was what does recess look like? You know, what are my child's options when they're outside? Teachers will have the autonomy to take their children outside for a break. You know, it's like using the term recess. It's almost like we want to almost come up with a new word, because recess looks like one thing, you know, last year. It looks like something different now. And so when kids are outside for recess, whether it's lunch recess, whether it's, you know, just a classroom break outside, we have all of these zones that are outside. There are lines that are painted on the blacktop. We have lines painted in the field, and they will get regularly refreshed. So if you've been out in the field, you're like, man, there's a lot of boxes out there. But the reason there's so many boxes out there is for a couple of reasons. One, when we do lunch, we've divided the school. We have 18, like if you think first through fifth graders, we have 18 classrooms. So we're dividing that to have 9 and 9. Okay, so we'll have 9 kids out, like 9 groups outside, while we have 9 groups eating. Okay, and the kids outside, and I think it's important for parents to know this, especially if you're participating in like sports and your kids are used to kind of like intermixing with everybody. One of the things that we're tasked with at school, and this ties to like health and safety, is we want, like, kids have to stay in their homeroom. You know, sometimes we kind of call the homeroom the pod. It's like the Patton learning pod. So if the 4 panelists right now are all classroom teachers, my classroom, when they're outside for recess, they will have their own dedicated zone. Adam's class will have their own dedicated zone. Same for Sarah and Kelly. It's not likely that we would really even be mixing those zones. So we've been working a little bit with Mr. Dolniak, and we have some outside resources where we're trying to come up with some different types of activities that allow for some social distancing while they're outside at recess. We are going to incorporate the playground as an element of our one of our zones, so kids will have access to that, and we'll rotate them through that so that everybody has a turn at that. And just specifically about the playground, there was a question about, is the playground sanitized every day? And the answer to that question is it's not. Just like any Arlington Heights Park District park, at least to my knowledge, I don't think the Park District is going through and sanitizing those. There's not a process for cleaning that. But one process that is in place is whenever kids are, like, they leave their classroom for whatever reason and they come back, there's a hand hygiene component to their return. So when you're outside at recess and then you come in because it's your turn to eat, hands are cleaned. After you eat and when you go back to your classroom, hands are cleaned. Return from a special, hands are cleaned. Return from anywhere, anytime you leave and come back. So there is going to be quite a bit of hand washing. Now, because nobody's been in the building, like no parent has seen the building since the construction, and you probably won't notice a ton of differences, but the one notable difference is we actually have a hand washing station in the commons now. So kids, we have an increased access to actually washing hands in addition to being able to use hand sanitizer. And then maybe just a quick note on lunch, because this topic came up too, and I'd say that I got a lot of emails about this, is can I bring my kid home for lunch? And the answer to that question is you sure can. We'll have a QR code that's outside. It'll be posted outside on the front door. You'll have to sign your kid out before we release them, but you won't have to come into the office anymore to sign them out on the computer. You can do it through your phone. And if you're having some troubles or you forgot your phone, just ring the doorbell and you can talk to Mrs. Hamilton or Mrs. Schmidt, and they'll input that data for you. And we have our kids appropriately distanced in the hallway outside of the main office. And then, once, if Kelly is being signed out, once her parents sign her out, we can then go to say, Kelly, okay, Kelly, your parents are here, you can go. And then we just need parents to sign them back in on the return. The one thing that we would ask, and it's not something that we can require, but if for parents who do choose to take their child home for lunch, I would probably say 80 to 90% of the time under normal circumstances, parents just keep their kids home during lunch that entire time, so they're gone. But there are occasions, and under normal circumstances, it's not a big issue if kids come back early and maybe attend outside at recess. So even though we can't require, one of our requests would be that if you do take your child home for lunch, that they stay home the full hour, because we have so many transitions that are happening, and it will just help make everything smoother, so we're not, so we just really want to make sure we're doing a good job of adhering to the social distancing guidelines. And the last thing, and then I'll stop rambling about outdoor recess, because I think I forgot to say it, is that kids can take their masks off when they're outside. We have 5 or 6 supervisors that'll be outside at a time to supervise those 9 zones. And just for perspective, 9 zones really only equals about 75 kids total. So we have a great supervision ratio. But yeah, they can take their mask off when they're outside, just as long as they maintain that 6-foot distance. But our supervisors will help support kids in keeping that distance outside. So,
is lunch hour 20 minutes still?
No, that's a great question, Adam. Wow, it's like you know our school so well, because we're kind of unique that way. So lunch is really now 30 minutes. We have 9 groups for 30 minutes, starting at 12:15, and then 12:45 is another 30-minute round. And we just have to, the 20-20-20 model doesn't really work in this setting because of the amount of transitions in the cleaning of hands. We need to do that 30-30, and that'll also help us with the distancing requirements that we're expected to follow. All right. Kind of lost my place in my notes here.
Can I go ahead and talk about snacks?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so in terms of snacks, the important part, food, right? So we are still going to offer and honor the fact that students can eat, and we'll have a snack break in the classroom. They may be working or listening to the teacher while they're eating, but it will still be an opportunity for them. And in terms of a schedule for a snack break, it'll occur once a day, and the classroom teacher will determine the schedule for that and can share that with you as well for the class. Just as in the past, we used to have the system of a fruit or a vegetable in its own skin. We will continue with that just to keep all of our students safe. Now, the pieces that look a little different this year have to do with what is set up on the student's desk as snack time begins. So understanding that students are going to have to get used to the process of eating their snack by taking their mask down, taking a bite, putting it back up, and knowing that there might be some time when the mask is down, students will be placing a trifold on their desktop that has a plexiglass front so they can still see forward, but that will hopefully provide another layer of protection as students are taking their mask off and on as they eat. Prior to beginning to eat, they will participate in a hand hygiene break, whether it be hand sanitizer or washing their hands with soap and water in the classroom. Some of you had asked, will children be allowed to bring their own hand sanitizer from home? And of course, yes, they can, and they can keep that at their workstation within the classroom. But also just know that there will be soap provided in the classroom as well as hand sanitizer as well, should there be a moment where a child might not have some for one reason or another. Additionally, students are going to be able to have water bottles at their workstations throughout the entire school day and have access to them as needed. And for any of you who have worn masks for an extended period of time, you know that how important it is to stay hydrated during those times. So some of what is going to be happening in terms of training students to function within this learning environment is how to appropriately take your mask down, take a drink, put it back up, and feel free to do that throughout the school day. The drinking fountains themselves will not be working within the building for student access, but the filling stations will be available so that water bottles can be refilled. We do encourage, again, the water bottles to be brought from home, and we just ask that they be the type of water bottle that your child can easily manipulate and access. And if you could also please label it, that would be helpful. And we are going to ask, just for a hygiene purpose, that they be taken home each night, cleaned, and returned the next day. I know in the past, some students have left water bottles and used them throughout the entire week. but given everything that we're dealing with now, the hygiene component will be incredibly important. Mr. Larson, do you want me to go ahead and talk a little bit about mask breaks at this time too? Would that be helpful? Okay. So as I said, there's going to have to just be a portion of welcoming students back that includes training them how to function in our new environment. The school that they left last year is different than now. And so we need to make sure that we give and recognize the needs that they have. And wearing a mask all day is different than anything they've ever experienced. So teachers will determine mask breaks in addition to when the students are eating snack, when they're having grade level recess, when they're having lunch recess or lunch that can be taken throughout the day. These mask breaks will be outside, students will be socially distanced, and of course classes will be socially distanced if there is an instance where multiple classes are outside at the same time. They're not meant to be extensive, meaning the length of time is not the same as recess. They're meant to be a short burst of time where students can get that moment of relief. And most likely teachers will be probably doing some sort of, I'm thinking, movement break or sensory break attached to that, and then they return to the classroom. Okay.
All right. So we're going to jump to some of the curricular topics, and and Adam, I can kind of see the chat happening at the same time. So I saw a couple questions that I know I can answer.
Awesome.
So one question that just came in just because Kelly was talking about masks. If a student, like, masks are expected when they're in the building, like it's not an option. So, you know, if we do encounter, you know, a problem where a student refuses to wear a mask, then we would have to work with the parents on a solution for that. The only reason that you would be allowed to not wear a mask is if you have some type of medical exemption, and we would need the documentation for that. But if a student, I mean, if we're just going to put it out there the way it is, if a student just flat out refuses to wear the mask, they won't be allowed to attend in person. It's just an expectation for kids when they're in person. So, Adam, I think that some of those questions that are related to tech, because I know you've been probably tracking them a little bit better than I have. Tech, you know, teachers teaching remotely. I think those are some of the topics that are in there. So, so to answer the question about, like, will my teacher be teaching remotely, but my kids will be in person? So I can tell you that if you were to check your email now, if you have 0 emails from your teacher at 5:30, then your teacher is teaching in person. So you can just know, I didn't get an email from my teacher at 5:30, that you would know the answer to your question. If you do have an email from your teacher at 5:30, they will be sharing those details specifically with you. So now I don't know if anybody's going to be paying attention to me because they're going to be checking their email. But
the possibility that some teachers would be remote while hybrid learning is going on.
The possibility exists, yes. I mean, the possibility exists that that somebody could be teaching remotely from home, and should that occur, there would actually be what we're referring to as a partner teacher, who would essentially be facilitating a lot of the things in the classroom. They would be the ones who would be helping the teacher who is streaming, like live streaming into the classroom. She would really be guiding the kids towards that instruction and making sure that the instruction is well received from the teacher. That person would also be responsible for helping the students navigate through the building throughout all of their transitions, but all of the core instruction, all of the instruction would be the responsibility of the teacher in that particular setting.
So like a partner teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, partner teacher.
How does social distancing work in the classroom?
Social distancing works in the classroom so that we transition to desks. And for those of you who know Mr. B, we refer to him as a FOM, the facility operations manager. You might refer to him as a custodian. He's in the classrooms. He's organizing all the desks, and he literally is measuring them all so that they're 6 feet apart. So, I mean, that's where school is going to be different. If we're just going to be very candid. I mean, typical school, like it's very active and there's a lot of movement inside the classroom, but it's different now. It's different. Kids will be expected to be in their seat, and that doesn't mean that they can't move. We're not saying that they're glued to their seat, but the movement isn't as free as kids are used to it being. So it's going to be an adjustment. It's going to be an adjustment for everyone. I'd like to just kind of talk a little bit, because I see a couple questions that have come up about technology. Are kids going to be like on Zoom while they're in the classroom? Those types of things. So teachers will also have access to, if they decide that they need it, because teaching is very much an art, and it's very unique to the individual who's doing it. But there are options that teachers have, like, we'll have webcams that are available to them to make the video component more flexible for a live stream and remote, in-person setting. We have also been given some speakers and microphones that better capture like the discussion from afar, because right now we're all sitting in front of our computers and we're just talking at our computers, but a better quality microphone that will grab the sound in a more meaningful way, so that the teacher doesn't have to be as close as I am right now to the computer. We will be expecting students, and it was in the parent hybrid plan, we will be expecting parents to have their children bring their devices to school. We ask that they're fully charged when they get here. But I don't anticipate that students will be sitting on their device on Zoom in front of them, essentially doing what they're doing at home. The whole point of bringing the kids in is to try to cut back, on some of that. And I don't want to be misleading, though. That doesn't mean that kids won't ever be on a device, because they will be on their devices. Teachers are creating activities that can be done on a device, but I don't anticipate that kids will be on their device Zooming where everybody's on Zoom. To be quite honest, I don't even know if the bandwidth could hold that. Now, something that I think about that could be a possibility, but again, this goes back to teaching as an art, is if I'm a teacher, and this might only work easier for older students, but I might be partnered up with a child who's at home, right? I'm in school, you're at home, and there might be an opportunity for me to connect with that, partner, if you will, and do that. But by and large, to just try to answer that, the question doesn't have a black and white answer, but the question does have the answer of, we don't anticipate that students are going to be spending a significant time on their device on Zoom while they're on their device. Sorry, it took me a long time to get to that. I apologize. And then in terms of supplies, what we'll be asking teachers to do, and for any of the Patton staff who are watching this right now, we're asking teachers to, on Friday, to send an email to their families that just say, these are the supplies that you need to bring for next week. We want to try to give some advance notice so that you kind of know what to bring, because we know that everybody at home has a different schedule. We don't want things to feel like last minute willy-nilly, so that you'll kind of know what to bring. The truth of the matter is, it's possible that backpacks might get a little bit heavy, and I wish there was a way to change that, but that's just the reality of the situation that we're in. So, Adam, I've lost track of the time, so.
Couple more minutes, right?
Yep, I see it. Okay.
7:27.
Yeah. So, Adam, I haven't been following the chat. So, is there anything in there that?
How are specials being handled?
Oh, that's a great question. I am so glad you asked that, because it was in my notes. So, I'm just going to speak more for 1st through 5th grade, but I mean, it certainly applies to K as well. 1st through 5th grade, if we think about PE and music, they, traditional setup, you see Mr. Dolniak twice, you see Mr. Whitaker twice, but then for art and LMC, you only see Mrs. Maloney and Miss Malamed once. The reality is, it's impossible to take a 5 days worth of specials and somehow jam them into 4 so that every student can have the exact same access to those teachers. It's just, I mean, when you think about only going to art once a week, it's not possible. So we have rearranged, and we're still like in the final stages of tweaking. So we'll be done with it by Friday, but we're trying to tweak the special schedule to get as much equity as we possibly can for the in-person learners. So what I mean by that is if you're in a class that has PE and music right now on Tuesday and Thursday, that's great for the Tuesday, Thursday kids, but it's not so great for the Wednesday, Friday kids. So we've really been looking at like, how can we adjust that so that maybe specials is, maybe PE and music as an example is, on Tuesday and it's on Wednesday. So that at least at PE music, you could at least get to see one, either Mr. Dolniak or Mr. Whitaker. And we've also tried to look at like, how have we balanced art for the kids in both cohorts? So it's not going to be perfectly even Steven, but we've really gotten ourselves to a close place to make it as equitable for everybody as possible, but it's just not going to be perfect.
I have another question from someone. So for kids with in special education who usually use like a pencil top chew or something like that, will that be allowed under their masks, or will they be allowed to utilize those types of things?
Yes, they will. They will. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. I know that I think it's 7:30, and I'd love to keep going, but I also know somebody else needs to use this webinar. Yeah. Additionally, we also have the PTA meeting that is occurring right now at 7:30. So if you'd like to join, we'll hop over there to that in a couple minutes. So we'll go through those questions that are in the chat, and then between the three of us, three being myself, Kelly, and Sarah, we will try to produce some answers to those questions that we can share out with the community. And I mean this genuinely, we have nothing to hide. Like, we want to be as open as we possibly can with what we're doing and what our plans are. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I know that we didn't hit every question that was submitted online previous, but we will still try to get an answer to those questions for all of you. So thank you all so much for attending. That was pretty awesome. We had 90 attendees. That was awesome. That was awesome. So good night, everybody, and look forward to seeing your kids next week.
Bye.